Welcome to a new edition of the Neon Jazz interview series with Kansas City Jazz drummer Jim Lauer on COVID-19 and the future. We spoke with him in early March 2020, right before everything went down with COVID, about a residency that he had with John Scott of the Green Lady Lounge and Black Dolphin Jazz Venture. It all went away with COVID. We caught up with him about how it all went down, what he's been doing during COVID, hope for the future, and so much more. Enjoy the interview.
Cool. Well, hey, thanks for taking a minute out to the show. I appreciate it.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
So the weird thing is I've been kind of doing some recon because obviously this last year we've all been just like mentally kind of decimated, so to speak. And it's weird because one of the last interviews I did as I kind of was looking back was talking to you about your residency that you were going to have at the Black Dolphin, which of course went away like everything else.
Yeah.
So I really kind of wanted to catch up with you about the pandemic, about what's coming up, about rekindling anything, just kind of talking to you in general about how this has been treating you. So I guess my first question is, how fast did that gig go away, and what were your reactions to just kind of going through this new way of no live music life?
So, and I don't know if I'm the greatest person to ask this about, so I have actually been working on, like, in addition to music, I've been playing music and teaching music, but I had been going back to school for the last few years anyway, working on a master's in accounting. Unlike a lot of people, what I did when everything went away, I actually got an accounting job. So it was kind of an interesting shift for me, like, completely, like, going from working and playing and putting together, working towards the big band thing to all of a sudden, working full time in a CPA office. So yeah, it was like a total culture shift for me. And that's kind of how I navigated it. That's what I did. And you may know my wife, we have a bakery too. And, there was a lot of just, when everything first went away, the last thing on my mind, honestly, like the gigs, like losing the gigs, that was hard. But we just had so many other things that it was like, okay, we've got to worry about this, and we got to make sure we keep the business afloat. We've got to do this, and so it was a really odd thing because I found myself often thinking, I'm so much busier right now because we're trying to do this, and we're trying to keep this together, and we're trying to get this to work. For a minute there, I didn't really think about the gigs. I mean, I know that's probably the last thing you want to hear from a jazz musician in a jazz interview, but it was just there were so many other moving pieces, and I think like everyone. Because almost every musician I've talked to, I feel like there was a total reset there. Things went away. I think everyone got kind of discouraged. But I think it's going to end up being a good thing because everyone took a little break. And then now everyone, the last 6 months or whatever, everyone's been like, okay, I'm going to get back in, focus on my music, focus on my instrument. And I think that in a weird way, maybe it's just me being an optimist, I feel like having a total reset where everyone just had to kind of take a break and walk away for a minute, I think it's going to end up being, in the long term, I think it's going to be good for the music scene. It sucks in the short term, but I think in the long term, I think it's going to end up being a good thing.
This is the exact interview I've been looking for, Jim, to be honest with you. Your answer is, you are. Yeah, you're the cat that I really want to run into and talk about this because there were a lot of career changes. There were a lot of reality checks. This last year was a huge year of self-revelation and realization and really digging into, like, what you have to do to survive and to make it. So I guess my next question to you is, what are your plans as, the vaccination spread, gigs are coming back, things are happening. What are you going to do as a jazz musician in this town as we move forward in 2021?
Man, one thing in the pandemic, and, when everything shut down, most of the gigs, if you got to play with anybody, they weren't even really gigs. Sometimes people will do some streaming things and stuff like that. And, one thing that's always kind of been at the center of what I liked doing, and even with the big band, it was always kind of centered around me and Sam Copeland and Jake Herzog. We have a trio. And throughout the pandemic, those were really the only guys that I got the chance to play with, because every now and then we'd do a stream thing, and if someone asked me to put it together, it was like, oh, I'll get Sam and Jake, and that was just like, didn't even have to think about it. Well, the interesting thing is especially if things have come back, for me personally, I really enjoyed booking more things on my own. And, that's not me sitting here saying like, oh, my name means anything, but I get to play with Sam and Jake, which these two guys are guys that I just love playing with. I think we have a lot of potential. We have a lot of arrangements. We have a lot of, it's not just playing tunes. We've stolen a lot of things from the Jeff Hamilton trio and the Ray Brown trio and stuff like that. So moving forward, one thing with, I guess, having a day job and then having an actual trio that I tend to play with is just kind of focusing more on putting things together where I get to play with those guys and get to continue working up, arrangements and pieces and stuff like that. And since I have a day job, I don't have to necessarily go out and take every single gig that possibly comes my way. I can be a little more selective and try to make not better decisions. It's not like I ever regret any gigs. I love playing any gigs, but I have found myself, since gigs have started coming back, where, there's some things that are like super late and it's just like, I've got a lot to do in the morning. Like, I can't do it, So maybe if anything, the pandemic has kind of made me sit back and go, I want to be a little bit more selective, and I just want to kind of do what I want to do and keep my day job and keep the bakery going and just do gigs that I want to do.
That's cool. You mentioned the reset. You mentioned kind of pause and all of this. So how do you believe the world of Kansas City Jazz is going to emerge stronger from this? I mean, you're already saying that you're going to be doing some of these things more on your own. I've heard a level of assertiveness that's kind of been resonating throughout the world of the Kansas City Jazz community. So I guess more pointedly, how do you see this community being stronger because of this pandemic and this year that we've gone through?
Well, I think a lot of people had to rethink how they do things, just like kind of like what I'm talking about. And I think from what I've seen, there's been a lot of people, they either took time to adapt, when things went how it went, so they may have started doing like streaming shows and stuff like that. But I think that out of that necessity to like, I'm going to develop this streaming thing, right? Well, that meant that, okay, I have to get a group that we can play together. And then it became, as things kind of tightened up, it's like, okay, well, we need to do more original music, so let's put this together and let's do this, And I really think that in an odd way, everyone being slowed, because I can think of so many people that, they may have played 7 nights a week, and now all of a sudden they're playing, one night a week there for a while, or maybe no nights a week. And I think that it made a lot of people sit there and go, okay, what do I really want to do long term in terms of, like, I can keep chasing standards gigs, which, don't get me wrong, I love standards gigs. So I'm not one of those like standards gigs, whatever. But I think a lot of people took the time to go, okay, I think I want to try to develop something, or I want to put together a project that's maybe more long term. In the grand scheme of things, I think that, and this is just my belief, I think that when people think things out better than just show up to the gig and call some tunes, I really do think it pays dividends, so to speak, because then you have a product, you're not just and I love last-minute gigs that are just, let's call standards. I don't want people to think that I'm complaining, because I just love it. But at the same time, I think that when you, it's like the Oscar Peterson trio. This is like my trio, what we try to strive for, When you listen to anything the Oscar Peterson trio did, even if it's like the most standard ever, they were able to craft, and this is my opinion, but they were able to take standards, and make them into the best version of that standard, right? And I think that that's kind of what having this time off did for a lot of people, is that people started going, okay, since I'm only going to get 2 gigs this month, it's definitely about quality instead of quantity. I don't know. And that's kind of been, maybe that's just my opinion, or maybe that's what I've tried to do, but that's what I see. I see the quality being better, because you have all kinds of interesting projects that people have started, and I think that that'll continue, since everyone was forced to slow down.
Totally. I agree. So what do you hope we all realize about the power of live music since it's been gone for so long and it's coming back? How do you hope we all collectively feel about this thing that we probably haven't thought about as much as we have lately?
Well, I can tell you what I've run into as I've started to play gigs. So many people, so I played at, the trio played at Corvino on Saturday night. And on the break, I was standing outside because it was pretty nice out. It was before it started raining. And I was talking to a guy who was a school teacher. And he was telling me, he was like, man, are you in the band? And I was like, yeah. And he was like, I haven't heard live music in like 14 months. He's like, I cannot tell you how amazing it is to sit in a room and actually hear live music of any kind. And I've had conversations like that with other people, and I really think, from an audience perspective, I think that, how do I say this? There's always an element with some gigs, and I'm not saying any specific places, but it's just a known fact. There's like wallpaper gigs, where you just kind of play in the background, and that's what you do, and that's your job, and that's your role, and those are some of the best gigs. But I think that people being sort of deprived of going out and listening to music and seeing live music and seeing musicians, I think that it's made people kind of stand up and go, whoa, like, I took this for granted. It's like eating at restaurants. When all the restaurants shut down, when my wife and I finally ate in a restaurant, we were like, wow, we really took this for granted. We thought all these years that it was just always going to be there. And so, I'm hopeful, but I think that maybe people that either wouldn't have listened to music, or, the people that are like, oh yeah, I love listening to live music, and then they never do it because life happens, they got other things to do. It's totally understandable. But I think there's going to be a lot of people that just go out and they just appreciate being out, and they appreciate listening to live music, and they appreciate Kansas City jazz. That's what in my mind, that's what I think should happen. Whether or not that happens, I don't know, but that's what I'm hoping.
Yeah, I felt like that when I was at the Green Lady the other night. I caught Rod Fleeman's trio, and it was triumphant. It was beautiful. Jim, hey, thank you, man, for giving me a whole different perspective. That's the beauty of reaching out to all of you musicians, is that there's such a flavor, there's such a swath of different things that are going on, and it's all really been about surviving what we've been going through and trying to adapt and be better as humans, because at the end of the day, this pandemic has a monopoly on all of us. We have no choice. You just have to live, and you have to do the best you can.
Yeah, no, absolutely. That's what it's all about anyway. And I think in the long term, I was one of those guys when the pandemic first hit and it first started, gigs started getting cut. It seemed like there was about half the guys in town, and I can think of those guys, were saying, oh yeah, August, we'll be back working by August. And I was one of those guys that as soon as I lost my first gig, it was like, I'm not going to play a gig regularly until I bet a year. And I just kind of had that feeling right away. That was a big reason why it was like, okay, I need to find a job. I think we finally hit that year, and I think people are getting vaccinated, and I think it'll bounce back. I don't think it's gone forever like I've heard some people say.
Well, Jim, hey, thanks again, man. I look forward to seeing you and all the other cats here locally out and about. It's wonderful that we're even talking like this right now for what we've gone through. And yeah, so good luck with everything. Keep doing that thing you do.
Yeah, well, thanks.
Thanks for listening and tuning in to another Neon Jazz interview, where we give you a bit of insight into the finest players in Kansas City and spots all over the world, giving fans all that jazz. Thanks to Jim for his time, music, and story. If you want to hear more interviews, go to Famous Interviews with Joe Domino in the iTunes Store. Visit Neon Jazz at youtube.com, and for everything Neon Jazz all the time, go to the neonjazz.blogspot.com. Until next time, enjoy the jazz, my friends.
Neon Jazz.